nice. Really, really nice. I think that's how we describe that line when they put the Tkachuk brothers together last night. Let's go to Chris Johnston this morning. Chris, what a start to this tournament. Canada, Sweden first, and then U.S. last night taking over in the third period against Finland. I think people have to be happy with what we're seeing so far from this event.
Yeah, I mean, it's exceeded even my expectations, and I was one of the more optimistic people, I would say, that this was going to be successful. I mean, look, Connor McDavid told John Cooper the other night after the Sweden game that's the most fun he's ever had playing a hockey game. And when you have someone who has, obviously been in the Stanley Cup final, had lots of great NHL moments, I think that says something for the event. And, what's sort of my takeaway has been with just how long it's been since that last World Cup and how much anticipation is built. The players really have come here wanting to do this. And I can only imagine what we'll be saying after seeing the games tomorrow, where you've got Sweden and Finland in the afternoon and then Canada, US in a big showdown at night. I mean, no matter what happens, no matter who wins, I think we're going to come out of that pretty hyped about what's to be for the next week after it.
I think I even liked a clip from Brad Marchand I saw on social media yesterday where he came into the room after the game and said, "Boy, you guys are fun to watch." Like he's basically just speaking for all of Canada when you're talking about Crosby and McKinnon and McDavid. And look, man, I thought that game kind of went how we could have expected. Like Sweden's not going to be a pushover in this tournament, and they gave Canada pretty much everything they could handle eventually in that hockey game.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, the first period, it's 2-0. Sweden barely registers a shot on goal. You wonder if that could get a little sideways, but from that point on, it was incredibly even hockey game. Sweden, enjoyed stretches where they were pushing the pace and controlling the game, and got back in the game, got a couple goals, and certainly by the end, I mean, I guess anytime you go to 3-on-3 overtime, it's a coin flip, but that one really did feel like a coin flip. There was good chances on both sides, and it's not a foregone conclusion Canada gets to the final of this thing. I think that's what it underscores. As much as the country's done a lot of winning and in these sort of tournaments, the margin for error is next to none when there's only 3 games and then the 2 best teams go to the final.
Well, we've already had people this morning saying, guys, are you worried that if Canada loses to the United States will let Sweden beat them so that Canada can't make it to the final? I don't think we get to that stage of this tournament, do we?
I don't think so. And Canada, I think, would still control its own destiny, although math might not be my strong point after a couple nights of not much sleep. So
I think if Canada, I think what they were saying is if U.S. beats Canada in regulation and Sweden beats Finland in regulation, if the U.S. lets Sweden beat them in regulation, then the U.S. and Sweden would play in the final.
But Canada could still beat Finland in regulation.
Yeah, but if they lose to the U.S. in regulation, they're only going to have 5 points. And Sweden would have 6 if they beat U.S. and Finland. Okay. Yeah.
I guess U.S. has to first beat Canada. I'm not going to I'm not handing them that win 24 or whatever, 36 hours before the game.
Okay, but with the U.S., from what we saw last night, Finland gets the goal, U.S. sort of plugs away, and then they put the Tkachuk brothers together with Eichel, and the line just completely dominates the third period of that hockey game. What did you think of those 3 guys, specifically the Tkachuks getting a chance to play together and basically being what we would have expected them to be as line mates?
Yeah, and sort of the emotional heartbeat of the team too, right? I mean, so much of this event, especially for the U.S. and Canada, where I know the players all know each other, but they haven't been a team completely together. And you're wondering where that cohesion comes from, who's going to drive it. I mean, anyone who watched the Canadian game, I think, would come away feeling pretty good about what Sidney Crosby did in that game. And he was sort of a tone setter, I would say, for the Canadian teammate, the McKinnon too, who finished a lot of checks. But I mean, the Tkachuk set a tone in an entirely different way. I think Brady might have been credited with 8 hits, if I'm not mistaken, in the game. And certainly he didn't miss an opportunity to hit someone in a white and blue sweater, scored the first goal to get things going. And then, seldom would a line change yield that kind of results, but they did take over the game. They just filled the net. And I think, with their dad, Keith Tkachuk, in the stands, a former U.S. player who was part of that team who won the World Cup back in 1996. And they sort of rescued the U.S. from what could have been a different type of game. I mean, look, I saw the U.S. management team at the second intermission. It's 2-1 at that point. we all know what Finland can do in these types of tournaments. Those guys looked like they needed an oxygen mask. Now, it just so happened the U.S. started the third period on a power play. They score one, they get another quickly after, and then they rolled from there. But the Tkachuks turned that into a comfortable win in what could have been a tight third period had they not scored the goals they did.
Chris, you're there. You're on the scene. You're covering the whole thing like a wet blanket here. It's what Shea Theodore gets hurt. You had a piece up for The Athletic about this gentleman's agreement of adding players, but you can't add them, but you can in case of emergency break glass. More on that, and if you will, share your thoughts too on what Cooper might do in terms of lines. And I know even though it's a win, an overtime win, a few people, give me a little sneak of Adin Hill. Do you see him? I know Cooper said he wants Binnington to be the guy, but what do you think in terms of lineups, including the goaltender, moving forward to tomorrow night?
Yeah, we'll start with the rosters. I mean, basically, it's a fluid situation. This is a new event. The NHL and the NHLPA coach sanction it, so effectively they can make up the rules as they go along. And I don't say this at all as a point of criticism. I think what happened after the Shea Theodore injury is everyone gets together and has a conversation about, okay, what makes sense here? And I'll posit what I think. What wouldn't make sense is not allowing Canada to have somebody on standby because they play Saturday night. Just think of the logistics. I think it's fair to assume this Canada-US game will be quite physical. There's just lots of different ways for players, unfortunately, to get hurt in hockey games. I mean, let's say Canada has an injury suffered to its defense on Saturday night. They're down to 5 defensemen, and they have to play a game Monday afternoon in Boston. It wouldn't make any sense to not allow them to at least have a player that would be in some position to play. It wouldn't be fair to whoever that player might be that they could be on vacation right now in a warm locale, hitting golf balls or drinking margaritas on a beach. And so essentially what they came to is an agreement where Canada can bring someone into the Boston area. He can't be a formal member of the team. He's not going to be on the ice at practice or the morning skate. He's not allowed to be in meetings, that type of thing. But he can at least be getting himself in shape and be nearby in the event they need. And so that's Thomas Harley, young left shot defenseman with the Dallas Stars. I think that's probably the right agreement. In some ways, I'd like to give you all that information and say, let's hope we don't see Thomas because I'm not certainly rooting for anyone else to get injured, but I think we have to acknowledge it's at least a possibility. As for tomorrow's lineup, practice is in an hour or two here. I would think, Sam Bennett was a scratch in the first game. Would not at all surprise me given the style of play I think we're going to see on Saturday night that someone like that draws back in. I don't have a good guess. There's not one player that I was like, oh man, you got to get him out. So I don't know if it would be maybe Travis Konechny, maybe Seth Jarvis, who's the youngest player on the skating team that might come out. But I think you're going to want to have, they brought a little bit of a grindy element for what Team Canada could be in the bottom 6, and I think you're going to want to have Sam Bennett in that game just in case the Tkachuks or JT Miller or some of the players the U.S. have turn it into a little bit more of a street, maybe like a Stanley Cup playoff game, than what we saw Wednesday. I would think they're going to stick with Binnington. He did make a couple, maybe not, he didn't necessarily save the game, but he made a couple tough saves, I'd call it, late in the third period, and then certainly in overtime, Zibanejad had a look on him. They were pretty clear. It's nothing against Adin Hill or even Samuel Montembeault. They're just going to start with one guy, and the only reason we see anyone else is if there's an injury or if it goes really badly and 5 or 6 pucks or something like that get behind Binnington. So I don't see any changes there. And then, of course, you're going to have Sanheim drawing in for Theodore on the back end. And so, I think John Cooper did say yesterday they're sort of maybe reimagining the lines. Like maybe we see a totally different look now because it's not like anything's set in stone after one game. But I'm fairly confident the top 6 will remain intact because I thought the McKinnon line, the McDavid line did their job the other night.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, do you expect Canada? I mean, do they need to play more physical because of the Tkachuks, or do they just try to beat them the way when they looked the best they did against Sweden when they were just all flying? You know what I mean? Like, do they have to get sucked into the game against the States to have success against the States?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know that they have to go out there to just necessarily try to set a tone or be, open ice hits. I don't think it's going to be anything spectacular. I do think though the USD is susceptible to the possibility if Canada can create a forecheck and can be finishing checks that way and make life difficult on them there. I mean, kind of what the way coaches tend to coach in the playoff series, right? I mean, there's this idea, you throw the puck in the best, the corner of the best defenseman on the other team, and you try to wear that player down by punishing him physically in a way that's legal. Like, I do think that will be part of Canada's message. It probably depends who gets the lead. Like I'd say the first two periods of the game the other night, Canada did roll four lines pretty well at 5-on-5, and there wasn't much power play time for either team in that game. Once we got to the third period and Sweden came back and it was a tie game, it was basically, McDavid line, McKinnon line, McDavid line, McKinnon line. But, Cooper is going to want to involve Brandon Hagel, Cirelli, as I mentioned, I think Bennett gets into the game. I think that those guys will have a role in the early stages of the U.S. game, just trying to, bring the crowd into it even more. And I think, sort of signal that Canada won't back down. So, I don't think there's going to be fights or anything like that, although who knows, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised if that happens, I'll call it. But I do think that, John Cooper and the coaching staff are going to be preaching getting on the USD, because as skilled as all those guys are, really good puck movers in the NHL, like you got, Adam Fox, McAvoy, Werenski, go down the list. I do think those players could be susceptible to some turnovers, if the game turns a little nasty.
Chris, quickly before I let you go, just to move away from Four Nations, get into the rumor mill a little bit. Do you think Brayden Schenn ends up being moved prior to the deadline?
Certainly a possibility. There's a fair amount of discussion around the league. To say whether or not it's going to happen is tough to handicap, mostly just because Brayden has a number of years left on his contract. And so it's not a situation where if you're in St. Louis, you're feeling you have to move him 100%. But clearly that organization has started to turn things over. They've already been active a bit this season. They've changed the head coach. And, there's teams like the Vegas Golden Knights, for one, that are interested in seeing if there could be a fit with Brayden Schenn. So, Schenn has a no trade clause. I think, my sense is if it's the right situation, he would waive it from his end. The Blues are obviously listening. And so the question really becomes, can they get some kind of return that makes this something that makes sense right now, or do they revisit it down the road? But, Schenn's probably one of the more intriguing names that's truly available now, left on sort of the trade boards, the trade bait list we have at TSN. That could change. There could be other players that join him, but, it's a little different than just a rental then, right? If you're making that trade. And I certainly think Vegas is a team to watch with him.
Chris, as always, man, we appreciate the time. Enjoy what should be a great day of hockey tomorrow in Montreal.
Can't wait. And have a few hot dogs in that press box too. It's a good event all around.
Rashad can't eat them all, eh?
Yeah, that's right. Save some for Chris.
Take the over on Rashad, by the way, for if you're betting in Vegas.
Oh, there we go. I will. I probably will be. All right, man. Thanks a lot. There you go. That's Chris Johnston.